Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem at all. I'm glad I brought some slightly better weather, or at least less rain and less heat than we've had in Hong Kong for the last few days. Just thinking what side might be the better side to stand over. If I stand over this side, I think everybody can see. So welcome once again. Thank you for coming. My name's Alistair Auty. I've been working with Savills for a number of years now, and I've probably been working in the New York property market for about 12 years. I'm a licensed New York real estate person, license holder, and my company helps Savills clients and international clients not only purchase property in New York, but also we offer a full service property management, so we can take care of your property as an investment for you if you are not there. So the plan for this evening is to talk a little bit about the New York and a little bit about the US real estate and economy to start off with. We'll talk about the rental market in New York, which is, I think, often a key consideration when looking to purchase in New York, as I suspect you'd ideally like to have a tenant, and the New York rental market is strong, so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the purchasing process. Buying in New York is straightforward, but it differs from other territories and cities and countries that you may be used to. It's different. In New York is different to London, different to Hong Kong, and I'll just outline the purchase process, which hopefully will be helpful. I'll talk a little bit about ownership considerations. What are your fixed costs when owning a property in New York? Broadly, they're the same as owning a property anywhere in the US, but again, they can differ from other countries you might be familiar with. We'll spend some time talking about 450 Washington, which is a building that Savills and I are featuring, located in Tribeca in Manhattan, which is currently for sale. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about property management, taxation. I'll try and dispel the myth that there's a lot of taxes in New York when you own. There actually isn't, but I'll try and cover that off in a bit more detail, and about financing options as well. So I imagine I'll probably talk for about 45 minutes. I'm very happy to take questions throughout or at the end, whatever works best for everybody. Okay, so this slide talks about the New York economy. If we talk about the US economy, just briefly first, back in 2008, the US economy was broadly the same size as the EU, including the UK economy. So 15 years ago, more or less the same size. We fast forward to today, and if we look at the combined size of the EU and the UK, which is now not in the EU, the US economy is about a third larger. So in that last 15 years, the US has been a good growth story. 7 of the largest tech companies in the world are all based in the US. And if we look or consider the US as an economic powerhouse, where in the US is specifically the most economic active, the strongest part of the US. And on the left-hand side of the slide in red, that is the metro New York area in terms of the GDP, it's GCP. As you can see, it's about 50% bigger than the LA metro area, which is huge in terms of geography. New York is a much smaller metro area, but it's still 50% larger than LA. Chicago is third, it's significantly bigger than that. But is New York reliant on any one industry? And the answer is it isn't really. The pie chart on the right shows all of the different industries and their percentage makeup within New York. The blue one, which accounts for about a quarter, is education and healthcare. But on a global basis, New York is sort of known as sort of the financial, media, and cultural capital of the world. So it's not reliant on any one industry. There's a lot of industries that make up the New York economy. So I won't dwell on this slide for too long, but in many big international cities in the world, London, Toronto spring to mind, you have a good percentage number of international buyers. In New York, the market is driven by the US domestic buyer. 85% of property purchase in New York is US domestic purchasers. 15% is international buyers. So for somebody who is international, who buys in New York, you've got a great exit strategy, because when it comes time to sell, you're selling to a dominant domestic marketplace. So it's quite a sort of a unique feature of New York is the strength of that domestic buyer base. Okay. A recent slide that we found this data from that I just thought we'd put up here quickly. UBS's Global Real Estate Bubble Index. So here they're trying to highlight which big markets may be overheating a little bit and which are still good or fair value. So the good news is New York is in green, so that's still good, fair valued market. It's not seen as being overvalued, which are the ones in yellow, or indeed at risk of being severely overvalued, which they believe that Zurich and Tokyo are. Interestingly, they've got Miami as an overvalued market. Miami is a hot market at the moment, but I wouldn't disagree that it's perhaps got a little bit too hot. So pricing has got quite punchy there. It's a great city and a great market, but it doesn't have the same infrastructure as New York, and it doesn't have the same number of high or well-paying jobs as New York. In my mind, I think we'll look at New York seen as being a very sort of fair, good valued market. So if we drill specifically into the New York City sales market, there's information up here I'll just cover off. So average pricing, $1,642 a square foot. That depends on what indice you look at. Prices have risen between 0.2% to 3.8% over the last year. So there's been some growth, but not a lot in the last year. And the key reason for that is interest rates are a little bit higher than they were a year ago, 2 years ago. So pricing, at least, is stable. It's not dropping, and I think will continue to stay strong and grow further. And one of the reasons for that is the low inventory. You've got 3.1% less homes available than there were a year ago, a lot less one-bedroom homes available a year ago. And that is because, in part, almost unique to the US in a way, people buy in the US and they have 30-year fixed mortgages. And a year and a half ago, you could get about 3.5% for a 30-year fixed mortgage. Now it's about 7.5%. So it's preventing perhaps younger new buyers to the market who have got used to really low interest rates for 15 years. But it's also stopping those that are looking to upsize from buying bigger property because they have mortgages at 3.5%. If they want to upsize and get a new mortgage, they're going to have to pay 7.5%. A lot of people are not so keen to do that. So it's keeping inventory low, which is keeping prices, keeping prices strong. Average price per square foot for new development is higher than for resale and broadly similar to the resale market in terms of prices are up about 2% year on year, relatively speaking. Last point I'll dwell on a little bit more, talk about the market pricing for buying, pricing for selling, saying fairly static. The rental market has gone up a lot in the last year, 9% to an average of $5,500 per month. And in New York, 70% of people rent. So there is always a lot of people looking to rent, and that's helped continue to push rental prices up. Interest rates being high, keeping people out of buying, they're renting, that's pushing rental prices up. So as a landlord, it's been a good year to be an owner because you're seeing rents increase way over and above inflation. So that's a sort of a good point to make. I'll mention this figure now and come back to it later, but the average rent per year in Manhattan is $85 a square foot. But I'll bring that back into conversation a little bit later. And we'll have a quick look at a few more graphics as we go through. This dates all the way back to 2008 and shows rental price growth in Manhattan. You can see over here the global financial crisis of 2008 and 9, prices dipped down. But apart from that and COVID, there's been a steady growth in rental prices. It goes to show that there's not too many factors that impact rent. And as I was just talking about, rent has gone up quite a bit over the last little while. So that's what's driving rental growth. Well, you've got people moving there for jobs. There's been an increase in demographics between 25 and 34, and a demographic of 55 and over. So you've got younger people moving there, older people moving there. Both of those demographics tend to have money to spend. That goes into the US economy, New York economy, keeps things buoyant. This is a graph that goes all the way back to 2006. Big spike is COVID. A lot of people moved out of the city, but as you can see, they've moved back, and moved back quickly, which is good. New York is a city. Working from home is not so much of a done thing. People are in the office, the streets are busy. But looking at that historically, your vacancy rates have been between 2 to 3%, which is a really, really strong level of occupancy. If we look at some of the other sort of hot cities in the US, Austin, high-tech city, vacancy runs at 6%, San Jose runs at 7%, and even Miami, which has seen a lot of inward movement over the last 2 or 3 years, that still runs at 7%. So New York, the vacancy rate historically been very low, always been strong demand. This slide is of specific interest if you are a landlord in Manhattan. It shows your turnover rate. One of the things that I think I know a little bit about, or at least I hear from my owners, is what they don't like is tenants moving out every year or every 2 years, because it hurts their return on investment, because you have a period of vacancy and expense in redecorating your apartment. You just don't see tenants moving out that often in New York. Figure there is about 5%. So for every 100 units that you manage, you're seeing only 5 of those tenants leave on a yearly basis, and that reflects my experience as a property management company in New York. Generally, your tenants want to stay. Of course, it helps if you provide good service to them, which goes without saying. You want your tenants to be happy, you want your owners to be happy, but tenants tend to renew on higher rents, better return on investment for owners with no vacancy or little vacancy. So, talk about New York. What are the sort of considerations? What are the types of property, firstly, that you can buy in New York? There's roughly 5 residential types of property that goes by different names, and they all have slight differences. Apartments in New York isn't actually something you would generally buy. Apartments are apartment buildings. They're owned by a single entity, and they rent out all of the units in there as a pure rental place, so a hedge fund or a pension fund or something like that. That's what in the New York market is called an apartment. You have land lease units, and they're more exclusive to Battery Park City. The government owns the land, and people lease the apartments within the building. So it's essentially its ownership, but on leased land from the government. But actually, it's an incredibly popular residential area of Battery Park City. You have co-ops. Co-ops are generally for owner-occupiers, not always, but generally, and they will sometimes have restrictions on being able to rent out or being able to use as pied-à-terres. So I don't tend to work too closely with international clients on co-ops because of the restrictions. You have condos where there are no restrictions, in terms of your ownership. You can rent it out, you can use it as a pied-à-terre, and then you have condos. 450 Washington is a condo, and that is a hybrid of co-op and condo. So a condo has condo rules. So, for example, at 450 Washington, you have no restrictions on renting your property out, or having a children's dinner, or using it as a pied-à-terre. So those are your different ownership options, different types of property that you can buy in New York. New development or resale. So, as you probably noticed from the slide a little earlier, resale can be a little bit cheaper. But how easy is it to buy one versus the other? So it goes without saying, new development, it's brand new, never been lived in before, has warranties with it. First year the developer has a team on site, so anything you may notice, unlikely you would, they'll fix. And it's an extremely simple purchase process, which I cover, I think, in the next slide. Essentially, you make your offer, it's accepted, you sign your purchase agreement, money gets transferred, and you're the owner. Nothing more than that. It can all be done remotely. Resale, you have to have your offer accepted. Then the condo or co-op board will want to see financial disclosures from all new incoming buyers. You don't have to do that with new developments. And of course, we're not never too sure what the condition is. Resale property is sold as is, so it could require a a fair amount of work to be done to it, and it may be in a building that is quite old, so the amenities might not be as nice. So new development really is more of a straightforward purchase over resale. How should you buy? Well, this is really down to personal preference. There is no restrictions on you purchasing as an individual, husband and wife, wife and daughter, husband and son, as long as you're the person is above the age of 18, that you can buy in that way. And there's no restrictions on residents of China or Hong Kong or Singapore or anywhere else owning property in the US. Or you could buy as an LLC. An LLC is a limited liability company, very easy to set up. Your attorney who will help you with your purchase transaction can help you do that. There's no taxation benefits in owning via an LLC in terms of income tax. I'll talk about that later. But some people like to buy as an LLC because it provides, one, a degree of anonymity, and two, it can be good for estate planning. As an LLC, you have members of it, so husband and wife could buy it as members. When their children become adults, they could add them as members, and at some point in the future, husband and wife can take themselves off, and the members are children A, children B, both of them, and that way there's no estate tax implications. So those are the two ways almost all people tend to buy. Some very high net worth individuals like to buy through BVI vehicles, which again is possible, but they would normally have taken some specialist advice on that. I mentioned attorney representation. When you buy in New York, one of the legal requirements is that the developer has an attorney represent them and the buyer has an attorney represent them. I've worked with the same attorney firm for 12 years now. They're very used to working with international buyers, very good levels of service, very fair and reasonable fees. And they're basically your eyes and ears and make sure that everything legally goes smoothly for you. So yeah, you'll have an attorney on your side as well. So that essentially are the main sort of purchase considerations when you're looking to buy. Those are the sort of the four things I would suggest you should bear in mind and consider. So the purchase process, the good news is it's straightforward and simple. This is a new development purchase agreement. So for example, you like Unit 123 at 450 Washington, you agree the price, Savills and I send that through to the developer. Developer agrees, and the developer will send a purchase agreement for the purchase of Unit 123 to your attorney. Your attorney will receive that. It's all of that. Everything's done electronically. There's no need to print things out or visit the US or anything like that. So he will receive it. He will email it to you. He will introduce himself to you, and he'll say, "This is the purchase agreement. These are my thoughts on it. Let's have a quick conversation via email or via phone just to make sure you're comfortable with it." One thing I should say, purchase agreements in New York are all reviewed and signed off by the State Attorney General's office. So these are very fair agreements. They're not weighted in the favour of the developer or anything like that. They wouldn't be signed off by the State AG if they weren't. So really there'll be no surprises within the purchase agreement. That in New York speak, that it's the developer calls it contract out. So the contract has gone out to you, the developer has it, they've shared it with you. They then would generally expect that to come back signed in about a week. And at that time, you would sign, scan it back, and you would wire your deposit to escrow. At 450 Washington, the deposit's 20%. That goes to a secure escrow account. That does not go to the developer. That sits completely aside from developer funds until after you've closed. So your funds are kept entirely separate and entirely safe. So that's stage one. Stage two is you would normally give your attorney power of attorney to close, do the physical closing for you in New York. I've been to them before. They're kind of dull. They take a couple of hours. It's normally in a windowless room, and it's attorneys with big mountains of paperwork. So, and it's normally just attorneys. Buyers are rarely there. So you would visit the US consulate, and they would notarize power of attorney forms, and that is the power of attorney to close on the property for you, nothing else. And so you would do that in between signing the purchase agreement and closing. That's all done. And then about 2 weeks before the close date, you would receive the final set of paperwork and the final balance that is due. Sign that, final balance of 8% wired to escrow, and then on the day of completion, your attorney would meet with the developer's attorney, sign the documents, and you are then the legal owner of that property. It is as straightforward as that. It's not too complex, or indeed too time consuming. Something like this could happen in as little as 6 weeks. Generally, I find buyers prefer for it to take a bit longer than that. And again, that of course is completely fine. So as an owner, a new owner of a property in New York, what are the things to be aware of? So your purchase costs, sort of first and foremost. It's a bit of an old-fashioned term now. It's called mansion tax, but essentially it's a tax on everything that costs above $1 million, which is almost everything in Manhattan. And it's they changed last year, so I've made a note. So I want to make sure I give you the right figure. So any purchase up to $2 million, it's 1%. Between $2 to $3 million, it's 1.25%, and between $3 and $5 million, it's 1.5%. So that is one of the two main purchase costs. The second cost is a bit like UK stamp duty. It's called City and State Transfer Tax. Up to a purchase price of $3 million, it's 1.825%. Above 3 million, it goes up to 2.075%. So those are your two main costs as a buyer of a new development in New York. I would allow for these three here about a total of 0.5%. The attorney fees will be a few $1,000s, title insurance a few $1,000s, maybe a little bit more because it's done on a per diem value basis. Recording charges are fairly minimal. So at the sort of the best scenario, your cost of purchase is going to be probably a fraction under 3.5%. If you buy a very expensive property, it will be a bit. It was a lot less than UK stamp duty, I believe. I mean, I try not to compare apples with pears, but the purchase costs are not too bad. Now, one thing I should mention. This tax here, or this fee here, that is something, and that one there, these could be negotiating items with the developer. So you could say, okay, well, I really like unit 1, 2, 3, and I understand the price is the price, but if I'm going to go ahead, I want you to cover those costs for me. So I'm not, because I'm not selling it, in terms of I'm not the owner of the developer, I can't promise. But that would be my suggested strategy. Strategy would be that you make your offer based on the developer potentially paying those two, and then all of a sudden your purchase costs are coming down. One thing I should mention, and it's only fair to mention, there is a mortgage recording tax in the US. So if you buy with a US mortgage, you would pay 2% of the loan amount. If you buy with a loan from a bank in Hong Kong, for example, or you buy cash, there is not that fee. So that's just one thing to sort of be cognizant of. So that's the purchase, and these are all paid at the time of completion. You don't have to pay some up front and some within a year. Everything's taken care of via the closing process. So I've just started talking about this slide too soon. You're the owner of a new property in New York. What are going to be your ownership considerations? What are going to be your fixed costs, and what are going to be your variable costs? So for anyone that's spent time living or working in the US, you may be familiar with the ITIN or SSN. These are tax ID numbers. SSNs are generally for US nationals. ITIN or individual tax identification numbers are often for international people that have assets in the US. As someone who has bought an income-producing asset, you will need to file a tax return. To file a tax return, you will need an ITIN or an SSN. Good news is, I've worked with the same accountancy company for 12 years. They're very used to obtaining ITINs for international property buyers. It's straightforward. It's a W7 form. It gets filed with the IRS. You get the ITIN number, and that just goes on the tax return every year. I should also point out you would need one of those when you come to sell. So it's probably not worth delaying getting one. But it's something just to be aware of. As I say, we'll talk a bit more about tax later on. Property management and leasing. If you're going to live in the property yourself, probably not relevant, but if you're looking to have a tenant to pay rent, then you may want to appoint a leasing and management company such as myself or others, and then they can do a number of things for you. For example, we would do the pre-inspection walkthrough, find a tenant, handle all the paperwork and things like that. Then you have two fixed charges as an owner of a property. The first one are called common charges, often known as monthly maintenance dues or fees, equivalent of service charges. So this is paid, and again, if you have a property management company, I'll do that on your behalf. It's paid to the building at the start of every month, and that is for the building staff, the amenities, the common areas, the building insurance. So to be expected, really. There will be a charge for that, and it's worked out on a per square foot basis. So the larger your property, the higher your fee. If you have a smaller one-bedroom property, then your monthly fee would be lower. And then the second fixed charge is property tax, also known as real estate tax, which is the equivalent of UK council tax. So that is paid to the New York City Department of Finance, and that is for police, fire, parks, trash collection, roads, and things like that. And that can be collected monthly. It depends building by building. Some collect it monthly, others quarterly, others biannually. So those are your two fixed charges. And then another one, which, although optional, like property management, I would strongly recommend is having contents insurance for your property. So for the appliances, for the bathroom fixtures and fittings. And again, your property management company can help you get that policy, about $1,000 a year. So those are your sort of considerations on an annual basis. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about 450 Washington, which is a related developed building located in Tribeca. So it's located, as you can see from the picture, on the waterfront. So you've got the Hudson River in front of it to the west. Most of Tribeca is to the south of it. That's the Grosses Street there, and then you've got Washington Street behind it, which is cobbled. And then as you walk behind the building further, then you get into Soho. So it's a very, very sort of centrally located building. It was built originally in 2009 as apartments. It's been converted so individuals can buy there, and the building is already completed, so there's no long lead time. It's been on sale for a little while now. 50% of the properties there are sold, so it's been popular on the market. And there's a good range of different types of property within the building. So you have studios, one beds that start around $1 million, and then you go all the way up to 2, 3, and 4 beds with full river frontage views that will, cost a little bit more, perhaps understandably. So that is the building, and over the next few slides, I'll try and talk a little bit more about it. So first of all, a developer you may have heard of Related. They've developed projects across the world. They're quite big in London in the sort of the Great Cross, King's Cross regeneration. They've built the iconic Grand in LA, but they are perhaps more widely known for being a New York developer. They're one of the largest, if not the largest, in New York. They've built over the last sort of 10 years all of the Hudson Yards area on the west side of Manhattan. They're a $4 billion company. They employ 3,000 people. They have 8,000 units in Manhattan itself. They've been about and operating for just over 50 years now. Not to mention they operate around the world. And they also are known, which is good for residents and owners, as having the city's best concierge service. So when you buy a Related building, they have their concierge team there permanently as part of the building staff. You need tickets for the theatre, they'll get them for you. So they're sort of renowned for that sort of personal level of service as well. So a strong developer with a good track record. which I think is always important when you're purchasing something, but a reasonable amount of money, several thousand miles away. It is a 16-floor building, so not super tall. It has 176 units in total. Those are the price points. They're 919, 1.15, 2.295. So I would say investor friendly in terms of, often in this part of Manhattan, the properties are very expensive. It's a very exclusive area. You have a number of celebrities that live in celebrity-styled building, and you can easily find property that runs $5, $10, $15, $20 million. So to be able to find a really good building with some attractive price points is a bit of a rarity, which is why it's a good building to bring and talk to clients about. We talked a little bit about rent and how strong rent is in New York. I thought it would be helpful just to highlight the areas or neighborhoods in Manhattan that have the highest rent. So Tribeca, joint highest rents in all of Manhattan. I was a little surprised to see Little Italy on the list, because there isn't. Little Italy has become very Little Italy. Chinatown's expanded over the years, and there's not that much of it left. It's not a lot of residential there, but really the residential areas that you'll probably be familiar with are Tribeca, are Battery Park City, are Soho, Lincoln Square up in the Upper West Side by the Lincoln Center Central Park. So those are well-known areas. That's your average rent, and on a per square foot per year basis, I'm seeing rents at 450 Washington at about $140 a square foot. The average in Manhattan is 85. 140 is significantly above it. So that does help with the overall ROI for 450 Washington. And that's the good thing about completed buildings. There is already a track record of what's being rented out, so you can see that those are rents being achieved. So the location, for those that may not be super familiar with Manhattan or Tribeca, it's on the southwest side of the island of Manhattan. The financial district is walkable. It's literally directly below you to the south and a little bit to the east. You have the Goldman Sachs headquarters, you have the World Trade Center, you have Wall Street. You can hop on the subway, you can take an Uber, you can take a Lyft, you can take a taxi, but you can walk if you wish to. It's a nice walk down the riverfront. Talking about the riverfront, the Hudson River Park runs from across the road where 450 Washington is, all the way up to the George Washington Bridge. So you have got miles and miles of running paths, cycling paths, golf driving ranges, parks. So it's a really sort of nice active outdoor lifestyle that is literally on the doorstep. New York University on Washington Square, that's less than a mile away. Again, you can take public transport, but you can walk down in less than 20 minutes through Soho. So it's actually a really nice walk to NYU. You've also got one of the city's best rated public schools, PF 130, located in the neighborhood. And you have a very good private school, Portfolio School, also located very close by. Soho is to the east, directly to the east of the building, and that probably needs no introduction. Great shops, great restaurants, good nightlife. And if they're getting further afield, just 3 blocks away, you're at the Canal Street subway, which has multiple lines that will take you all across Manhattan and beyond. But what I would say is, over the years, we've worked on developments together in Midtown, for example, which is great. You can literally walk anywhere within about 5 minutes. But with that location comes a little bit of noise. There's more traffic around there. At this building, Soho, this part of Tribeca, it generally is pretty quiet, pretty calm. The roads behind the building are relaxed. It does feel residential, so it's got a nice kind of calm feel to it as well. Some pictures of the interiors, and I know there's some more information in the brochures that the guys have got. As you expect, a related development, it's very high-end finishings and features. You've got super glazed windows, you've got wood flooring, marble bathrooms. Everything has Miele appliances. So it's top end, which will be attractive for living there, but also attractive for when you're renting it out. What's offered within the building? There's a whole host of features and amenities as you would perhaps expect. One of my favourites is the 4,500 square foot terrace that they have on the 12th floor. You have amazing views from the Statue of Liberty up the Hudson River. You can see the World Trade Center building. You have sort of Soho to your east, and as you look to the north, you have some of the iconic Manhattan Midtown buildings as well. There's seating areas, there's lounging areas, there's barbecue areas. It's a really nice feature for the building. You don't find that many buildings that have that large outdoor space. It does have a private garden on the ground floor that you enter the building through. If you love your golf, that's a state-of-the-art golf simulator room, plus residence lounges, children's rooms, 24-hour dormant concierge. And then one thing that is particularly appealing, especially for owner-occupiers, because it's quite unusual in New York, is they have a parking garage under the building with direct elevator access into the building. So if you have a car, you don't need to walk a block or two to where you would normally have to in New York with parking garages being located normally off-site. So lots of amenities within the building itself. That covers all. We popped the slide up here just talking about sort of, an example income and expense projection. This is taking a studio as an example with its price points. So just mentions its size. The estimated rental income, that's, I think we went with $130 a square foot a year to try and be conservative. You don't want to, the one thing I find as a property management company is you don't want to say to a prospective client, you'll get this rent, and then when they close, you say, well, actually, I was wrong, it's lower. So trying to be very fair with what we think the rent would be. Gross yield, potentially around 6%. You put in your fixed costs, top two are fixed. Third is property management, so optional, but we've left that in there as well. Insurance gives you your net, gives you a net yield of pushing 4%, which for Manhattan is good to very good. Often we see net yields in Manhattan at 2.5% to 3%, more not often 2.5%. So your projected net yields at this building, I think, are likely to be better than average, perhaps considerably better than average. So I think that sort of was worth highlighting this evening. Property management. What can property management offer you if you're buying as an investment? You're busy doing your thing each and every day. The property management company, so they'll handle all of the pre-closing liaison between yourself, between Savills, between your attorney, between the developer. They will do the walkthrough inspection for you to make sure everything is perfect. Any punch list items are taken care of. They can assist with obtaining the ITIN and with your annual tax returns. Before you get to that, once you've closed, the inspection's been done, they will help find a tenant for you, do the interviewing of all the tenants, do the credit checks, background checks, handle all of the lease application paperwork that the building will require as well, take security deposits. It's always 1 month, the security deposit in New York. Tenant moves in, rent will be collected, be paid onwards to the owner's preferred bank accounts. Monthly statements that are sent out that will track income and expense on a monthly basis. All expenses will be paid on your behalf: insurance, property tax, common charges. Inspections will be carried out at least once a year, normally by myself. I like to make sure I visit all of our owners' properties at least once a year. I also try and get out to Asia. It's the first time in 3.5 years, almost 4 years since I've been out, but I've always in the past come out a couple of times a year to meet owners on a one-to-one basis. And all owners have my details as well, so they can contact me at any point in time. So having a good company look after investment property for you in a country and location many thousand miles away is I think is important, and that's a little bit about some of the services in a nutshell that we offer. Okay. Quick sip of water before we talk about taxation. I must say I am not a tax accountant or a tax attorney. I've just worked with investors and their accountants and with their tax returns for about 12 years. So I've kind of become experienced in knowing a little bit about them. One thing I hear a lot of is, oh, there's really high tax in New York. And I think, oh, that's not what I've experienced. With income tax, and I think we'll come on to it on the next slide, an example, and it's actually a real life client's tax return. I crossed his name out for obvious reasons. He's owned a property now for, it must be about 8 years in New York. And he's never had a single dollar to pay in income tax because the US tax code allows you to deduct a great number of expenses, and it allows you to depreciate the purchase price of your property over 27.5 years. So for every $1 million of purchase price, that's 30-something thousand dollars that you can offset against your income every year. So from a tax perspective, an income tax on an ongoing basis, I have yet to see a client have to pay income tax because of the deductibles that are allowed as part of the US tax code. The tax return process is very simple. You don't have to do it. I supply my client's income and expense to the accountant. I'll ask if you've got any mortgage interest that needs to be reported, any travel and expenses, anything like that. The accountant prepares it all, he completes the forms, I'll make sure you're happy with what's on them, and then they get electronically filed. That's it. It's a straightforward process. The one tax potentially to be aware of would be capital gains tax. If you make a profit on the sale of your property, and a profit is once you take your purchase price and your expenses and your purchase price and take off your expenses, the net profit that is left, there would be capital gains tax to pay on that. That tiers as income tax does. So the first X is taxed at 10-15%, and then it works its way up. So if you buy a property and you sell it in 10-15 years and you make a lot of money, you're only paying tax on the profit that you've made. There is no international owner tax, no wealth tax, nothing like that. Those are really, I believe, the three things to be aware of. This is what it's called a 1040 NR. 1040 is the RS4 number. NR stands for non-resident. This is one of the pages, the main page from tax returns. This shows that this owner, nice 2-bed in the East Village, he made $93,700 in rent in 2022. You file tax returns, unlike the UK, in the US it's done on a calendar year. So everything from the 1st of January of this year to the 31st of December of this year, that tax return needs to be filed by the middle of April next year. So you have a fair amount of leeway. Here are some expenses that are listed. You've got some insurance, that I think is the accountancy fee, it's management fees. This property did go vacant last year, so $3,000 was the cost of getting it repainted. Property taxes, there's his depreciation. That kind of gives you an indication that his purchase price was about $2 million. And then that's your total expenses. So income of 93, your paper expenses, because of course that isn't an actual loss, 116, therefore that's a loss of 22,000. You don't have any income tax on that, and then that carries forward like that. So hopefully that sort of explains in a little bit more detail that of how the income tax works in the US.
What about mortgage interest? Is interest deductible?
It would be, and he was a cash purchase or purchased with a loan from his own bank, so that's why there isn't that on that.
Can I ask about depreciation? How is it being calculated for condo?
So it is calculated, you take the purchase price and it can be depreciated over 27.5 years. So take $1 million, divide it by 27.5, I think that's $34,000. My math isn't so good. And then that's what you get each year. It's 2 million, you're getting double the 33, you're getting 72,000. So it's as simple as that. And it's good that it's simple because I can sort of easily point out it's not some complex formula that you look at it and you think it's kind of straightforward. Financing, US banks, local financing from Hong Kong cash or equally acceptable or has to be done by wire transfer. Generally, I find foreign nationals can obtain up to about 60% of loan to value. Loans are always amortized over 30 years, which is a little different, I think, than say the UK, where it's 25. And more often than not, there are no early repayment penalties. So you're okay to pay your loan off early if you wish. You don't tend to get penalised. That's sort of norm. And then I've put this up here, but one of the fair housing laws in the US is you can't discriminate on age, which means that you can get a mortgage in the US generally as long as you can afford it, regardless of how old you